So Arpan, we discussed the LiveView.JS library, which is being able to control the front end from backend code. We discussed multiple region support in Phoenix LiveView, and we discussed how to handle global state in Phoenix LiveView. Welcome to another edition of Software Sophistication, the Q&A show where we talk about Elixir, Phoenix LiveView, and all things software development. Today, we have a mega question from Arpan, who hit us up in the YouTube comment section, and he's asking about all things LiveView architecture. So I have with us a special guest, my longtime mentor, and even though we don't see each other that often, someone that I consider a friend, a term that I do not use lightly. So Micah's here today, and he is an architect at F5 Networks, which is a startup doing interesting things. Micah, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about F5 Networks, and I guess a little bit about your career.
Yeah, so F5 is a kind of a giant enterprise company that's been around since 1996. They're kind of the company that everybody uses but nobody knows. They build the box. Like if you've seen the, every data center in the world pretty much has an F5. But I am part of a small team that's doing an incubation project at F5 Networks. We're called EdgeForge, and basically we're coming up with ways to use the F5 cloud to basically give you like push button access to the edge, right? So like you have an app and you want to deploy it, think Heroku style, you push a button, it's on the edge, or it's in the cloud, it's available on the internet. But yeah, that's me and that's what I'm doing. Prior to that, I worked at Heroku for 6 years and was a principal engineer there. So, and I've done Elixir for 8 years in some capacity, but professionally for the last 5.
That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, so you were one of the people that convinced me to switch, or not switch, but to try out Elixir, and I consider myself a full-on Elixirist at this point. What do you think about the current state of the Elixir and Phoenix ecosystem, where it stands today as of December 2022?
Oh, I think it's a really exciting time. We're at this point where the ecosystem is kind of matured. Like there's not a lot of what I would call like crazy innovation, but there's still like a lot of innovation going on in the Elixir ecosystem. You've got, especially with this new Bumblebee stuff that just dropped, you've got a lot of stuff in the AI world, a lot of stuff with machine learning and NX. You've got the LiveView thing going on, which is kind of a counterculture view of building, real-time applications. You've got just a great language to build pretty much anything you can imagine at this point, and do it efficiently. So I think that it's a great time to be in Elixir. I'm definitely excited to see what the next 10 years are going to do for it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, let's get right into it. Arpan, thank you for your question. There's about 8 questions in your YouTube comment. It was very well structured. I feel like this probably took you maybe an hour to put together. So we will do our best to answer your questions with the height of expertise. 8 years of Elixir experience is not easy to come by. So let's see what we can do. I have been working with Elixir for 3 years and have some experience with LiveView as well. I love using LiveView, and I could write a lot on why I love it and what are the good things about it. But here I want to discuss some concerns and questions I have about LiveView. So we're going to be talking about the LiveView.JS library, Micah. So he's talking about WebSockets and state. Ideally, I would love if the state of the page is completely maintained on the server side, but with the new LiveView versions, I see the team has introduced the Phoenix LiveView.JS module. I'm not sure, but I think this allows us to update the DOM without a server network round trip. I would love if you guys would create some videos explaining why this is required and what problems does it solve. What do you think, Micah?
I mean, like some videos would be great. I also do think, though, as far as asking what problems this solves, I would say that the real problem here is like sometimes you need to do things like an animation when something's clicked or something, and you don't necessarily need to make a round trip to the server. So that's kind of where the LiveView.JS steps in, exactly like you said.
Yeah, so I've been using Alpine.js for the vast majority. I think for over the past 2 years, I've worked on 6 different LiveView applications, and I've always just used the Alpine.js very thin JavaScript framework. And it always felt dirty to me to use like an actual JavaScript framework as opposed to being able to do it via LiveView to animate things. Say like you have a drop down and you click on the drop down and it shows and animates and stuff. Something with the LiveView.JS module allows me to keep all that code on the back end and be able to control the front end from the back end. So now I'm writing less JavaScript and I have like less, the less JavaScript, the better. So that's my take. I don't know if you have any further thoughts.
No, I think that's a great take on it. The idea is to get to market quickly and get it in one language, and the more JavaScript you have to write, the less you're living that dream. So yeah, obviously,
right. Yeah. All right, so we're going to jump into our next one, which is a multiple region question. I'm excited to ask Micah specifically about this because we attended a ElixirConf 2021 presentation about when Fly.io originally released this feature where you could deploy your app to multiple regions. So I'm curious as to what Micah's take is, because I'm sure he's opinionated on this, the result of this question, which is also, while WebSockets are cool, I think to keep our application fast, we will need to deploy it over multiple regions so that the client has the WebSocket connection with the closest region. Otherwise, the connection to the server might be slow, leading to slower UI updates through the LiveView WebSocket. Making Elixir distributed is not that difficult, but still creating a distributed setup adds to the complexity. What do we think about multiple region deployment for Phoenix LiveView, Micah?
Well, this is a tricky one, especially me trying to create something that's multi-region currently. But realistically, we always talk about the connection speed between the user and the server that it's talking to. But I think there's another aspect to this that we have to think about, and that's the connection speed from the server to the database, right? And so when you talk about a multi-region system, you get much more complicated than just connecting to users. Really what you're talking about, because like imagine you make a request to the server and it does like a user lookup, and then let's say maybe you're trying to create a post, right? And then it creates some kind of audit trail record, and then it creates the actual post, and then maybe even like update some type of record somewhere else notifying somebody, right? Like there's multiple things that can go on in a single request.
Right.
If you think about that, and you think about if your database is in a different region, you've got multiple requests going from the region you're currently in to your database. So if you have your system set up in such a way that you have a distributed application, the further those endpoints are from the database, the slower your application is going to be.
Right.
So I think there's a lot more here to think about than just time to the server, right?
Okay.
We actually also have to think server time to the database, which means that we really, in order to have a world like Fly.io is pitching, we need like eventually consistent databases of some type. And they really, there are some, and they're getting better, but they just really don't exist right now. And so if you even read like some of Fly.io's blogs, they have a whole bunch of hacks they put in place where like they try to always write to the current connection, but if the connection doesn't write because you have like, you basically create like a Postgres with multiple read nodes, and then what happens is if it tries to write, it gets an exception, and when it gets the exception, it catches the exception, and then it goes and looks up the actual place it's supposed to write to and does the write there. That way the reads can come locally, and so you can get kind of a speed up on reading. The problem with that, though, is that this is still kind of a pipe dream, because I know from my experience with Postgres at Heroku that even a database under moderate load.
What's considered moderate load?
I'd say, a few hundred reads per second or minute, right?
Okay.
Like you're not talking about like a lot of load, but you're talking about a database that's under some type of load. It can take seconds, and under high load, it can even take minutes. I know that some of our databases had almost 10 minutes before the followers would catch up.
Wow.
So when you're talking about like reading from that read database and then writing to another, it could be minutes before that happens. So in the world that we're in today, like it's still kind of a pipe dream.
Okay.
I wish the best to so many people, and we're trying to figure out some of this stuff ourselves. So realistically, your server is probably most likely going to live next to your database, at least if you value performance.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, so I got this as a hot take a year and a half ago, and it's kind of cool to see that the problem is still as it was a year ago with regards to multiple regions. And I value your opinion on that, Micah. Thank you so much. So the next one is about global state. When working with LiveView, I have found that there's no nice way to maintain a global state. For example, libraries like React have Redux, which acts as a global store. With LiveView, if I want to use a current user assigns inside a deeply nested component, I have to pass it all the way from the top level LiveView all the way down through the component tree. I see some people suggest storing stuff in the process dictionary since LiveView works in a single process, so all live components have access to the process dictionary. Probably we need to explain what the process dictionary is just so that people have a reference point. This works, however, things stored in the process dictionary are not change tracked and only a socket assigns are change tracked. I do think we need a nice global state management system with LiveView. What's your take, Micah? And what is the process dictionary so that those who may not be initiated can understand?
Yeah, so if you've never dealt with Elixir before, the way, or Erlang, but just say Elixir in this case, because they're the same thing basically, you have the idea of processes, and processes are very lightweight, almost like threads. Now, the interesting thing about processes is because there's no mutable state in Elixir, the way you kind of maintain mutable state is you have a process that maintains a state and kind of recurses on itself. And then in order to access that, memory from that process, you ask that process something about its current state, like go find me the user 123. This is pretty interesting and leads to a lot of different things. But the real thing is that there's no mutable state here. So how do you, if you have a process that holds all of your users, how do you access that process without passing that process through your entire application? And so this is where like this global process dictionary kind of comes in place, is that there is a process that holds the key values and the value being the other processes. So you can say, give me the process named, user management, if that's what you wanted to call it, and it would return to you the ID of that process, and then you could send the process to that. So it's just a way to look up the processes in your application throughout your entire application, because your application can be distributed in Elixir across multiple nodes. And then he goes on to ask about this. So yeah, this is interesting. I think this is just a problem with distributed systems in general, right? Like, I think distributed systems in general need a better way to manage like a global state. But if we're asking about passing these things all the way through, I honestly, I don't know that there's the better way to do this currently. I mean, even if you look at something like React, you kind of like pass this global state through your entire application. Now, there's some nice tricks you get where you can kind of pattern match out the pieces that you care about with kind of like the JavaScript. It's not called pattern matching in JavaScript. Destructuring, yeah. You can kind of destructure the pieces that you care about from the state, mutate those things, and then kind of like pass the state back through. But you're passing the entire state of the application through. It doesn't look like you are because you're using your object destructuring in that way. And you can kind of do the same thing in Elixir too. Like you kind of have to end up passing your entire state through your application, but you can use pattern matching to grab out the pieces that you care about and kind of ignore the pieces that you don't. It gets a little trickier though, because you can't just mutate state. You have to like go back then and update the original state.
Right.
But overall, I think it's fine. I don't know that it's as big of a problem. Well, it is a problem, but it's not necessarily like something that everybody else isn't experiencing too. Right.
So if you've got the process dictionary set to an assigns variable in LiveView, and when you access it, is it like a living thing, or is it like something that is static relative to the LiveView, in the sense that if I want to look up, say I've got something defined in the process dictionary, when I access it, do I have to keep updating what is stored on my socket with the state of the process dictionary, or is it living? Like if I want to access something, a key in the process dictionary, and I've got it assigned to my variable, and say the process dictionary changes, or I've got one key in it and then I've got another key in it, does my LiveView assigns have to be updated to point to the new reference to the process dictionary, or can I just or will it, my reference, know that it went from one key to two keys inside of the process dictionary?
Well, so typically the process dictionary it stores some type of key into, and that key could be your current process ID plus like the thing you're looking for, right? Like you could have, and I think this is in his example, he's saying, you take the current process ID and the current user, and you use that as a key to look up some type of state that you're want to hold on to, right? And then in that state, you have some type of process that wraps the state of the current user and maybe other things that you want to stick there. Mm-hmm. And then whenever you need to access that, you say, hey, process lookup, here's my PID and the thing that I'm trying to find for my PID, which in this case, we could just say current user, right?
Right.
Now, remember that usually should return a PID and not like a value.
Okay, right, okay.
And so then from there, if you need to update the state of the PID, you should send some type of message that says, hey, update the state of this thing, and in which case it tracks its own state. And then the next time you ask it, the message goes in the inbox and it picks up the next message and says, okay, you're asking for the state now. Remember, the messages can only be ran sequentially. So basically, it's always, like even though you think of it as a highly distributed or like a highly parallel system, everything's only running single-threaded. They're just sending messages to each other. Even the kind of mailbox queue is single-threaded, where it's like getting the next message off, processing it, getting the next message off, and processing it.
Right.
So from that perspective, you could update the state of that process, and then the next time you ask that process for its state, well, it would give you the state that was updated. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. So if you just make a reference to the PID itself and you just ask what the state of the PID is, you don't have to worry about keeping track of state in two places.
Right.
That's essentially what I was asking.
Yeah. And so this is, I don't want to say it's a hack. It's actually a way to do this. And even in Ruby, you would oftentimes, like in Rails, you'd have your current user and you'd need to be able to like pull it out of thin air somewhere. So like maybe you had a card or something and it was part of a separate process or a separate, not a separate process because that's kind of but like a separate subroutine of things, and you didn't want to pass your current user through everything, so you might set it on the current thread state and then grab from the current thread state the current user from that.
Right.
So this is kind of this is a practice that's done in other languages as well. It's just a little different because you don't have mutability. Now, the question is like, is this a good thing or not? Well, it really depends on your application, right?
Okay.
And there's I mean, like his comment here that he wishes that there was a nice way to manage global state. I mean, this is a problem every language has, and like I agree. Like I wish there was a nicer way to manage global state, but or within LiveView. However, I mean, this is kind of the constraints of the system. If we want immutable data and we want a functional system, then we kind of have to pass the state through everywhere, or we have to store it off in a process and go get it.
Right. Arpan, something just came to mind where in the Ecto docs, I implemented multi-tenancy, and the example in the Ecto docs, it actually talks about storing the state of what tenant is set in the process dictionary for your LiveView. If you look at that, the docs for Ecto multi-tenancy, that should give you a nice kind of like scaffolding with which to solve this problem in the future, because multi-tenancy is naturally linked to this problem set. And I've done this, and I did find the abstraction of accessing the process dictionary. I did find it kind of fun, and I thought that it was an awesome way of solving the tenancy problem in a functional language. So, yeah. Today we've discussed the LiveView.JS library, where we are controlling the front end from the back end, and the merits and why we would want to do that or not, multiple region support in Phoenix LiveView, and global state and how to handle it in Phoenix LiveView. Do you have any thoughts about just those three topics in general, Micah?
I think the thoughts I have about those three topics may be thoughts that apply to every topic. There's no silver bullet in software development, and there's always trade-offs. And anybody that tells you you're not trading something for something else is either doesn't understand the problem or is misleading you. And so I think it's very important to understand that, like LiveView solves a ton of problems for us, but it doesn't solve all of our problems. And I think that's the same and true for every single domain or software problem that you can think of. I think LiveView is a great choice for new projects and for teams that want to get stuff to market quickly. And but it might not be the choice for you in your framework, or not your framework, but your project and your idea. But I think there's also, because it's so good, I think that you'd also, in order to convince me of that, you'd have to come with some pretty compelling arguments. So, yeah.
Well
Always
said.
trade-offs.
All right, I guess that wraps up part 1. Arpan, check us out in part 2, and thank you for others who are tuning in.